The first time Tamsin Farouk saw the Elysian crown, the ship sulked against the quay like a disgraced monarch, towering, salt-streaked, and silent, with gulls circling its rust-bitten funnels like a crown of noisy carrion. The rain had thinned to a briny mist that salted her lips as she tipped her chin up to study the liner's wounded lines, the Art Deco sweep of her superstructure, the generous promenade decks, the once cream hull now scabbed with oxides and time. She'd won her at a bankruptcy auction for the price of a middling townhouse, on paper a ruin, in her bones a dare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. She felt the dare in the tendons of her hands as she hauled her tool bag over the gangway. The deck, underfoot, vibrated with the old ship's heavy sleep rather than any beat of life. The port watchman, Marlowe, a man whose beard looked permanently wet, offered a wary salute. "Whole city's laughing, Farouk," he said, eyes crinkling. "A mechanic buying a dead ocean palace. You find gold and boiler ash I don't know about?" Tamsin grinned without showing teeth, as if any sudden happiness might spook the ship back into grief. "I don't need gold, Marlowe. I need parts. And stories." He snorted. "Stories don't pay dock fees." "They do if you tell them right." She didn't bother to add, "if you find the one no one else can find." She crossed the threshold where the steel had been cut and re-welded a dozen times by long-gone hands, the smell of salt and iron sluicing into a deeper breath, old varnish, wool, coal dust, a ghost of perfume. The Elysian crown had last sailed in 1979, her final voyage a humiliating shuffle to lay up. The cruise boom had passed her by, the recession gnawed her belly, and then the holding company starved her for parts until even memory squealed. Everyone said she'd never move under her own steam again. Tamsin didn't mind. Movement wasn't what she was buying. She was buying silence, and whatever listened inside it. The forward companionway gaped like a throat. She clicked on her headlamp and let its beam pull along polished balusters worn dull by a million careful hands. The Elysian had been famous for them, the handrails, the staircases, the way the ship taught you to move yourself more beautifully just by asking. In the flare of her lamp she found a brass plaque riveted at chest height, "Engineering, authorized personnel only." She touched the cold metal like it was a doorbell to a long empty house. She had read every scrap she could find before bidding, the registry of refits, insurance surveys, the quiet scandal of a fraternity week cruise when a senator's son jumped ship and didn't drown. Rumors about a vault for diplomatic mails, a Cold War suite built into her belly, sealed, lead-lined, never inventoried when the ship retired because someone lost a key across 3 bankruptcies and 2 mergers. All the little ragged edges that get tidied away in glossy histories, those were the stitches she followed. The engine room lay 5 decks down and 20 years away. On the way, she passed the empty first-class lounge, its chandeliers webbed with salt mist, the piano exhaling a tired chord when she brushed its keys. She paused only long enough to zip her jacket past the place where the cold nibbled. It wasn't poetic to say the ship was hungry, but it was honest. At the last steel ladder she paused, listening, a hunter who had arrived at the edge of someone else's sleeping place. The big space below was an amphitheater of absence. Then, faint as teeth chattering 2 rooms over, she heard it, a drip, another, a slow iron heartbeat. "Hello, old girl," she murmured. "I'm here." She anchored her tool bag, descended, and stepped onto a grating that had been scrubbed so many times its serrations gleamed under the rust. Turbines loomed to port, great, sleeping hush machines, while, to starboard, the auxiliary generators crouched like guilty dogs. She opened her bag and laid out a liturgy, multimeter, insulated gloves, fiber optic borescope, a wrench set polished by long use, a little can of kindness labeled PTFE spray. It grounded her as surely as the ship's hull grounded the sky. Tamsin had been pulling elevators out of skyscrapers since she was 19, rebuilding the hearts of machines that lifted strangers into air and brought them back down intact. The Elysian crown was another elevator, she told herself, just sideways, a tower laid on its flank, its cables all pipes and its counterweights made of sea. Hours became a string she knotted, isolate circuits, test breakers, coax corroded clamps to confess their grip, trace the path of a cable until it vanished into the hull like a river losing itself to the sand. When she finally cracked the panel for the emergency diesel, her lamp drew a clean, surprised gleam from within. Somebody had loved this machine better than the rest. The fuel line had been purged, no black algae gum, no stink of defeat. A scar of tape on the housing bore a faded felt-tip scrawl, Prime 30s, choke 1/4, listen. Listen to what? She asked, though she knew. To what it's telling you. She primed, she choked, she listened. The starter whined. The diesel coughed, a smoker's contemptuous laugh, and then, on the third try, steadied into an old man's run, rough at first, then round, then, as the current found old arteries, the engine room's dead lights guttered once and chose to live. A tremor went through her that had nothing to do with the deck. A distant relay thumped, a low hum propagated upshaft, somewhere, she imagined, a chandelier resumed being a small sun. See, she whispered, as if to a skittish foal. You were waiting. She took an hour to bring power to the essentials. She didn't trust the main switchboards, too many paths to fire, but she trusted her instincts and the known silence of metal. Life crept back into the ship in careful circuits. She made tea on a contraband camp burner and sipped it on a catwalk while watching gauges that had not moved in 20 years remember how to point. Marlowe's boots clanged above. You rewired a ghost, he called down, incredulous and a little respectful. I asked politely. He leaned over a rail. You've got a visitor. The word cleaved her quiet along an old scene called weariness. She shut down fuel to a slow idle, pocketed her multimeter, and climbed toward the light. Two men waited by the forward gangway, both in port jackets that shone a little too much like uniforms without flags. Their smiles were the kind that measured. The taller one did the talking. Ms. Farouk. Congratulations on your unusual purchase. Can I help you? She asked, the simple way a wrench asks a stripped bolt. Help us? Perhaps. My name's Pierce. This is Mr. Hargrave. We consult for entities who have interests in maritime salvage. We'd like to discuss what you intend to do with the Elysian Crown. What I bought, she said, I intend to fix, catalog, and sell. Pierce's smile trimmed itself to a sharper curve. And if the ship contains items outside the bill of sale? She looked past him at the river where late light lay down like a road. Then I'll read my contract again, she said, and left it at that. Hargrave's eyes had a diver's flatness. There are rumors about a sealed compartment. Diplomatic pouches. Perhaps more. Rumors pour faster than rain. Tamsin felt her pulse steady into a mechanic's rhythm, count, check, decide. If you're here to trespass, don't. If you're here to make an offer, send it in writing. Pierce opened his hands as if to show they were clean. We're just saying, the chain of custody for any sovereign male would be complicated. It's better for everyone if trained professionals guide you. And you chose now to guide me because... He tilted his head toward the deck lights, which glowed along the companionways like veins under skin. Because the ship woke up. News travels. Tamsin held his gaze until he looked away first. Good afternoon, gentlemen. They went, but their wake stuck to the railings like oil. She waited until the sky softened to pewter and the dockyard lamps made little moons in the puddles. Then, alone again, she returned to the narrow world under the world where the ship kept its secrets. Night in the Elysian Crown was proof that darkness has taste. It was not the blind dark of caves but the dark of velvet, stitched with the prickle of 1,000 tiny indicator lights, each one an ember of possibility. Tamsin moved through it with a quiet care that felt like loyalty. Her map, stitched in her head from the surveys in her own walkings, led her aft, past the refrigeration plant, dead, the bakery, flour dust like fossil snow, and the print shop, a calendar still pinned to a corkboard, February 1979, with a circle around the 14th, Valentine's. She found what she had been seeking on a bulkhead that looked as unremarkable as a sermon, a door without a handle, lead seals squeezed flat where wire had once been, a brass plate scabbed with paint that once read post and dip, its last letters eaten by time. Hello, she said to the plate. I've been looking for you. She photographed everything: plate, seals, weld seams. She measured the thickness of the bulkhead with the borescope and made notes in a waterproof notebook that had outlived 3 roofs. Then she crouched to examine the hinge. Somebody had smeared marine epoxy in a carefully clumsy way over what once had been a lock, an imitation of amateurism that smelled like a professional who didn't want to explain receipts. This was where patience ended and skill began. She rigged a portable fume hood and pulled on the cartridge mask. With a heat gun and a fillet knife sharp and mean, she peeled back the epoxy until a rectangle eyelet of steel blinked at her. Inside, an old-fashioned abloy cylinder, the kind of lock a clever child could talk to, given time. "Tell me a story," she murmured. Her pick-set whispered, the deck hummed, somewhere above, a gull cursed the night. The cylinder sulked for 8 minutes and then, with a small, surprised sound, conceded. The door didn't move. She expected that. The ship had pinned it shut with pressure and stubbornness. She anchored a come-along to a structural member, clipped her harness, and nursed the jack until the steel sighed. When the seal broke, the air that exhaled smelled like library dust and old coins. She eased the door open, the way you open a wounded thing. The room beyond was the size of a generous garage and cleaner than any part of the ship had the right to be. The emergency light she'd restored found a grid of lockers, a rack of canvas mailbags crusted with wax seals, and, against the far bulkhead, a vault door that was not shipfitters' work at all but bankers, round, proud, with a wheel like a ship's but smoother than any helmsman could love. She stood very still and let the moment lay its weight across her shoulders. It was not glee. It was gravity, the kind that makes tide tables and prayers necessary. Tamsin approached the canvas bags first. They were heavy with something that shifted like books. Wax blobs bore stamps she didn't recognize, double-headed eagles, squared crosses, and others recited familiar names, consulative, foreign office, not legible without rubbing, which she wouldn't do. She counted, noted, and left them as they were. Touch later. See first. The vault door had a dial with no numbers, only index marks, and a plate etched with a manufacturer's pride, Harrington & Sons, Toronto, 1951. Someone had retrofitted a solenoid lock to the frame, in the 60s, she guessed, by the wear pattern on screws and the laughable insulation tape. No power fed it now, the wires she had reawakened bypassed this place as if respecting a taboo. She drew a finger along the dust. The line gleamed. "Who are you built for?" she asked, not expecting an answer and receiving none. There are ways to open the proud doors of bankers without breaking laws or promises. Some involve stethoscopes. Some involve patience with physics and the way metal remembers heat. She chose a third way, because the first 2 would angle her into the realm of theft, and the third keeps a ledger with cleaner columns. She traced the conduits that fed the solenoid, found a junction panel disguised as a support bracket, opened it to reveal a shelf of old passwords written in hardware. A spring, a plunger, a relay that still smelled faintly of ozone. She tested with the multimeter, closed a circuit with a jumper, and heard a click in the lock that sounded like a sigh turning into hope. "Not yet," she said gently. She took more photographs. She closed the panel and sat with her back to the vault door, breathing, listening to the ship talk in creaks and tiny taps. When her hands stopped trembling with the good fear, she stood. The wheel resisted at first, then rolled with the slow dignity of surrender. When the dog bolts retracted, she had to lean her shoulder into the door to move it. It pulled free with a sound like an old hymn sung in a new key. Inside, the air was colder, as if the room had kept a winter behind the metal. Shelves lined the walls, crates stood in ranks that took her breath not with number but with insistence. Labels, neatly lettered, in 3 languages. She stepped in, her headlamp rode its quiet circle across the first crate, North Atlantic Art Transit, 1957. Below that, for temporary storage only. Do not open without authorization of, the rest had been scored out, years ago, by someone with a sharp objection. Her throat worked. She lifted the lid of a crate that had no wax or wire, she had to use a paint scraper to coax the wood. Inside, oiled paper bundles. Inside the paper, frames. Inside the frames, she dared not touch the canvas, colors deep and patient even in the poor light, signature a small, ferocious snarl in the corner. She did not say the name. Names make spells and testimonies, and men in dark coats appear with warrants. She closed the crate. She turned to a shelf where flat tins nested like giant coins. Each tin wore pencil on its lid, perf. Stock, travel, 1958, F, office. She slid one out. Inside, under a ring of cloth tape, was a roll of film, its leader brittle with age, its frames whispering stop-motion stories that hadn't seen light since a country's promises were different. Somewhere between film tins and canvas, a smaller crate waited with the insistence of a dog that expected no love and still offered it. It had no label. She levered it open. Inside, a velvet-lined tray cradled cylinders, each in its own brass sleeve, each kissed by a line of stamped numerals. She picked one up. It was heavier than she liked and warmer than it should have been in a cold room. No, not warmer, her hand was colder and the brass remembered hands. She set it down, carefully, and peeled a brittle paper band from the tray. The ink, astonishingly legible, said, Royal Mint, Platinum, Assayed 1942. Her breath left her like a diver's last bubbles. She swallowed, hard, then counted under her breath not numbers but choices. The canvas could be fakes. The tins could be nothing. The cylinders were not nothing. She knew the price of platinum like she knew the price of a new head gasket. She did not do the math. Not yet. Tamsin backed out of the vault and sat with her back against the cool wheel, staring at the mailbags, the shelves, her own hands. A rumor had shifted into a calculus so heavy it threatened to break the ribs of her life. She closed her eyes and did what she always did when heartbeats threatened to trample brain. She told herself a small true story. I am a mechanic. I fix. I carry weight by distributing it to the places built for it. I am a daughter who learned budgeting by rebuilding a carburetor on the kitchen table because rent was due and Grease doesn't mind company. I can do this. When she opened her eyes, the world hadn't simplified. It had become itself, which is the only simplification that matters. She took out her phone, switched to airplane mode, and opened the camera. She photographed the exterior of the vault, the door, the hinged numbers, the crates only by their ends, never the contents, and the tray of cylinders from an angle that proved nothing but existence. She made a voice memo in a low voice that sounded like someone else. Elysian Crown. Aft sealed room. Vault present. Contents include canvas and storage frames, tins of film stock marked government, cylinders stamped platinum. Mailbag sealed. Estimate, no estimate. Legal, chain of custody unclear, auction docs show hull and fittings as seen, no exclusion of contents. Note to self, call Asha first, no, call Hadi first, no, call no one until secured. Breathe. She stood, and the ship stood with her. Securing a discovery is not romance, it is cable ties and redundancy. She jammed a doorstop under the vault door to keep it from drifting closed. She installed a battery-powered motion sensor at the entrance and paired it to a key fob that would vibrate in her pocket. She scratched her initials in tiny letters behind a light bracket, high where a casual eye wouldn't go. She resealed what she could without erasing the truth that it had been sealed. She switched off her lamp, stood in the dark, and listened. The ship sounded like a city seen from far away, alive, but not yet awake. When she reached the main deck, the world had been reborn in fog. The dock's sodium lights smeared into halos, the river wore a scarf of light too thin to warm anything. She locked the hatch and turned, and nearly collided with a man and a girl huddled under a single umbrella. Sorry, Tamsin said automatically, then saw the worry that lived in their shoulders and set down roots. The man's jacket said River Authority in peeling letters. The girl was maybe 8, her curls clumping in the damp. Miss Farouk, the man asked. I'm Ken Doyle. This is my daughter, Mona. I'm sorry to bother you after hours, but my ex is late, and the shelters are full because of the power outage upriver. Could we wait in your gangway for a bit? I'll keep her out of your way. Everything about the request was inconvenient. Everything about it was ordinary and human. Tamsin's life had been saved 3 times by people asking her for nothing more than a seat, a warm place, a pause from weather. "Of course," she said. "Come in." She made them tea in paper cups printed with roses that had survived 3 companies. Mona held hers under her chin like a campfire and studied Tamsin with an unembarrassed intensity that always made Tamsin feel both seen and vaguely miswired. "You fix boats?" Mona asked. "I fix anything that pouts," Tamsin said. "This one's a very big pouter." "Why'd you buy it?" "Because it was sad," Tamsin said, and surprised herself with the truth of it. "And because I think there's something inside it that forgot how to be found." Mona nodded, satisfied. "My teacher says some things like to be lost." "Your teacher's not wrong," Tamsin said. "Lost can be quiet. Found is loud." Ken took a grateful sip. "You sure we're not in the way?" "You're anchoring me," she said, and meant it. They stayed 20 minutes before Mona's mother's car blinked its hazards at the end of the dock, a lighthouse in Micro. Ken thanked her too many times. Mona waved from the car window like someone leaving a country they liked and might never see again. Alone again, Tamsin reset her shoulders. The night had that peculiar stillness of ports between tides, as if the earth held its breath as water changed its mind. She returned to the engine room to coax the diesel into a clean idle for the night, its rumble a comfort she felt in her teeth. When she climbed back toward air, her key fob vibrated, 3 short pulses, the motion sensor's discreet language for visitors. She swallowed a word that would have tasted like a brake pad. She went quiet by habit, footsteps as soft as cloth, and ghosted along the passage until she could see the mouth of the sealed corridor without stepping into it. 2 silhouettes stood in the churned lamplight. One was narrow, with a posture that studied everything in order to resent it. The other was built like a dock cart and gave the impression that no one had ever told him to move and lived to insist. Pearson Hargrave. Not in port jackets now. In something blacker. She felt no anger, only the calm fed to her by 100 problem bolts that had rounded themselves smooth from shame. She slid back into shadow and did a small inventory, distance, footing, noise, exits, what her hands knew without eyes. Pierce's voice traveled like a fish through water, felt, not seen. "This is it." Hargrave's answer was the weight of a pry bar biting metal. Tamsin leaned her head against the bulkhead and listened to the ship's opinion. It said, "I have swallowed worse." It said, "I have also broken better." She stepped out of the shadow and said, "You're about 3 minutes uglier than the law allows." They spun. Hargrave's eyes learned her shape. Pierce's smile didn't move, which meant it was stuck. "Ms. Farouk," he said smoothly. "We tried the polite route. You tried the kind of route that doesn't like daylight." "We can help you," Pierce said. "The contents of this compartment, if any, will entangle you in more law than you can imagine." "I can imagine a lot of law," she said. "I can also imagine you in handcuffs." Hargrave hefted the bar. "We're not here to argue." "Then you'll leave fast." Pierce's eyes flicked past her. "You're alone." "I'm never alone on a ship." She said it lightly. It was true like gravity. He did a small, impatient cluck with his tongue. "You can't possibly think you can control what's in there. There are claims predating your birth." "Maybe there are," she said, and unclipped a small device from her belt, a square no larger than a deck of cards, with a knurled knob. "Maybe I'm careful with things that can explode." He took a step back before he could stop himself. "Explode?" "Hydrogen in old refrigeration lines. Ethylene in film stock. Whatever gases those male seals ate for breakfast." She flicked the knob. A soft whine woke, the sound of air taking an interest. "You open this wrong, and the best case is you pepper your lungs with history. Worst case, the room burns without flame and sighs your names like a boiler." Hargrave lowered the bar a fraction. Pierce's mouth made a shape that knew the scent of bluff. "You're stalling." "I'm educating," she said. "Tuition's free." "The certificate is," you get to walk away still breathing. If we walk away, Pierce said softly, we return with a court order and a dozen men who make us appear gentle. Then return, she said. With paper. Until then, you're trespassing. Hargrave's patience, which had looked like a cliff, decided to calve. He lunged. Tamsin had already moved, not away but in, the way you step into a wave that would otherwise take your legs. She let the pry bar's momentum ride its own regret into the bulkhead, twisted, and plucked it free from his hand with a torque that sang satisfaction up her forearms. The bar clanged, bit deck, skittered. Hargrave made a noise like a kettle drum. Pierce drew a thin thing from his coat that wasn't a weapon until it was, a telescoping baton, and Tamsin raised the bar like a fencer who had learned from scaffolding instead of lessons. There was no artistry in what followed, only a careful application of mass to hubris. She didn't aim to hurt, she aimed to stop. She did. They went, eventually, bleeding pride and swearing bureaucracy. Hargrave paused at the end of the passage to look back the way boulders do, expressively. You'll regret this. I already regret the part where I trusted you to be cowards in a tidy fashion, she said, and watched them fade into the fog. She stood with her hands on her knees and the pry bar cooling against her palm. The ship hummed in its bones. Somewhere, water knocked once on a pipe as if to say, good. She didn't try the vault again that night. She slept in a crew cabin with a door she could brace with a wrench and dreamed that she was rebuilding a pump while the ocean looked on like a patient god. Morning was fog burned off by the soft torch of a weak sun. She woke to her key fob vibrating again, 2 long pulses this time. Disturbance ceased. It meant someone had tried a door and thought better of it. She brushed her teeth at a sink that spat brown and then ran clear. She wrapped her hair in a red bandana that made her look like pictures of her mother laughing with her hands. She ate a granola bar that tasted like the memory of fruit. She opened the hatch and walked straight into a wall of flashbulbs and microphones. Ms. Farouk. Is it true you bought the Elysian crown for scrap? Is it true you've restored power? Is it true the ship contains state property? Pierce had kept his promise about men who made him look gentle, but he'd chosen the version with camera crews first. A local news van idled on the quay like a small, eager whale. The reporter's smile was made of television, which meant it was real in a different currency. Tamsin took a breath and built a scaffolding for it. Good morning. Yes, I bought the Elysian crown at public auction. Yes, I've restored limited power to stabilize the structure and prevent further corrosion. No, I won't comment on rumors. She let the last word land like a box on a shelf, not thrown, not dropped, just set down where it could be reached again if needed. Are you refusing to confirm the existence of a sealed diplomatic vault? I am confirming the existence of a steel ship that is mine, Tamsin said pleasantly, and stepped past them as if their bodies were furniture. She called the only lawyer she trusted to pick up on the first ring, Asha Kamdar, who had once saved Tamsin's shop from a landlord who confused leases with scavenger hunts. Tell me you didn't buy a cursed boat, Asha said by way of greeting. I bought a sad one, Tamsin said. And it has a room inside it that might be happier than the rest. Define happy. Happy like heavy. There was a pause in which Asha's brain did trigonometry. Okay. Step 1, secure. Step 2, document. Step 3, call me before Step 4. What's Step 4? Letting anyone official inside. Not yet. We need to understand your auction docs cold. Text me photos. I took photos, Tamsin said, and felt something unclench because she had done a right thing at the right time and someone else knew it. By noon, the Port Authority had erected temporary barriers that did nothing to slow gossip. Marlowe glowered at anyone who glowered at Tamsin. A woman in an impeccably cut coat arrived with 2 men who made their suits look like uniforms. They introduced themselves as representatives from a northern embassy and left cards that felt like thin knives. Tamsin retreated into the ship the way a turtle does, not to hide, but to carry her home where hands could not pry. She spent the afternoon in that vault room, inventorying with the restraint of a person who knew that looking is a moral act. She didn't open anything she couldn't close exactly as she found it. She used chalk to number crates and a notebook to number thoughts. In the third row of shelves she found a wooden box with a split lid and, inside it, a ledger notations in tiny pencil. B. Call, loan, 1957, insured, $12.4 million, $1,957 US, /AGG. $97.3 million. To be returned upon instruction. Delayed by. The last word had been erased hard and overwritten with a careful nothing. Her stomach did a slow excursion that felt like a ship finding a new depth. She knew enough about money to know that $1,957 had their own weather. She knew enough about multiplying to understand that her title deed had become something else in the night. She found, in a steel cabinet, another ledger, inventory, cryogenic materials, do not tilt. The cabinet did not contain cryogenics, no cold lingered there now, but the entries were precise and bureaucratic, which is another way of saying they contain faith, vials for medical trials, tissue samples, seed banks packed in dry ice for transatlantic transport. Some had been signed out, some signed in, and then a final entry, hold until instruction, February 1979. Hold, she said out loud. The word felt like a gear sitting between teeth, ready to turn the moment a hand asked it to. Her phone buzzed. Asha, auction docs arrived. Class 7, sea vessel and appurtenances in situ. No explicit exclusion for contents except for hazardous materials declared prior to sale, none declared. You're in a strong position for possession, weaker for title where sovereign stuff is concerned. We pace ourselves. Don't let anyone in. I'm filing injunctions for a temporary quiet title. Also, do not die, asterisk. Tamsin smiled despite the part of her mouth not designed for it. She thumbed back, asterisk copy. Room secured. 2 suits tried to break in last night. Repelled with science and sarcasm. Will not die if avoidable, asterisk. A shadow crossed the doorway. She looked up, heart spiking with the easy, bright fear you can see your way around. It was Marlowe, holding 2 lunch boxes like peace treaties. Brought you something that pretends to be stew, he said. And a thing that claims to be coffee. She took both offerings and closed her eyes when the coffee did, in fact, behave like courage. Marlowe, she said, what have people said about the ship? He squinted into the vault room without stepping in, as if the threshold charged toll. Depends who you ask. Old-timers say she carried a duke once who tipped in diamonds. Dock rats say a stowaway had a baby in the laundry and named it after the boiler. Embassy guards say their bosses used her as a moving wall safe. Me, I say she's a barge that wants to be a cathedral, and I should have pressed you harder not to buy her. I need you to press me harder now, she said. I'm keeping people out. I can get you a guard after midnight who scares even me, he said. Name's Olga. She reads poetry to seagulls and they listen. Hire her, Tamsin said. Bill me. He nodded, as if both the poetry and the billing were ordinary, which, in ports, they are. By late afternoon she had a list that made her palms prick, crates of art whose provenance she would not guess it out loud, a gold-stamped hulk of a book titled Treaties, Supplement 1956, a leather portfolio of maps annotated in a hand whose confidence left dense, and the tray of platinum that anchored every calculation to the bedrock of numbers. She did the math then, finally, because someone had to. She didn't need to be precise, she needed her blood to know whether to run or walk. Platinum price times estimated ingots, even conservatively, she wrote a number, crossed it out, wrote another. 120 million was a kite string within that wind. She rested the pencil and felt the ship move a fraction under her, as if it, too, had exhaled into a different life. She took a breath in another. Okay, she told the vault door. Now we're dangerous. Evening sloped its hand across the river, and lights in the city stitched themselves awake. She closed the vault without spinning the wheel, fully locked, and set 2 wedges the way a retired burglar had once taught her to layer a door. She secured the compartment and made for the main deck to brief Olga, who terrifies. Olga arrived like a verdict in boots. She was taller than Tamsin by a head and had the vast, mild patience of a person who has chased drunks into better choices for 30 years. She listened without interruption, then nodded once. Men say vault like they say mother, Olga observed. With hunger and blame. I will keep them out. Thank you, Tamsin said, and meant all the parts of it. She was halfway back to the engine room when the lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. The diesel still thumped along with a tone that told her it had hours left in it. But the flicker had not been engine, it had been something else drawing breath where it hadn't in years. She followed the shiver through the ship the way a reader follows a dog-eared page to a favorite paragraph. It led her forward, not aft, up, not down, to the wireless room, which had once hummed with code that saved ships from ice. The glass on the door read radio, Marconi in gold leaf that had outlived companies and storms. Inside, a small tabletop set blinked patiently. It shouldn't have had power. It had power. A soft orange bulb in the corner glowed like a nearly remembered word. A printer, one of those narrow tape beasts from the 60s, coughed twice and spat a strip of paper that curled like a shy snake. Tamsin watched it the way you watch a thunderhead decide what kind of day to be. The strip straggled to a halt. She reached out and read. Elysian Crown / status query / hold for instruction / wait courier. Her scalp prickled in a way no wrench could smooth. The code header was obsolete, the call signs the sort that should have retired to museums, but the message was new. New ink. New heat. Who are you talking to? She whispered, but the room, which had decided to become a mouth, kept its new secret, static that felt like breath between teeth. Her phone buzzed again. Asha, *, judge granted temporary restraining order. Anyone trying to access without your consent eats contempt. I'm en route with 2 locks and 3 pens. ETA 2230. Also, stay near people, *. Tamsin texted back, * radio room just printed a message. Not a joke, *, then she hesitated, took a photo of the strip, and sent that, too. Asha's reply was 2 dots that thought for a long time, then, do not be alone until I arrive. Tamsin was, of course, alone when the ship shivered again, a small, almost affectionate, tremor that set a teaspoon singing against a saucer somewhere. The diesel hiccuped and caught itself. Somewhere below, a pump coughed in its sleep. Somewhere above, on the fog-blurred quay, feet approached in a pattern that said, more than one, less than many, not in a hurry because why hurry when you've been told no and learned a way to hear yes instead. She pocketed the strip of paper. She took the pry bar because tools are prayers you can swing. She stepped out into the companionway and listened. The ship listened back, its plates translating footfalls into geography. They were heading aft. They knew the way. She moved ahead of them by a passage and a thought, descended one ladder, climbed another, clipped through a storage room whose benches still smelled faintly of wax and rope, and slotted herself into a corner by the sealed corridor like a puzzle piece that had always belonged there. Voices arrived, clothed in whisper. Pierce's tone was absent, Hargrave's justification measured. A third voice, new, spoke with the misapplied courtesy of men who kept ledgers in their veins. We'll be quick, he said. The order arrives in the morning. Consider this a preview. A key turned. Not hers. Not the ship's. A locksmith's child. The motion sensor vibrated her key fob like a heartbeat you borrow. She exhaled once, slow, and stepped out. That's enough, she said. 3 faces swung toward her in unison, Pierce, Hargrave, and the third, a man with pale eyes and a scar along his jaw that looked like a river on a map. His badge clipped to his belt said something plausible and untrue. Miss Farouk, the third man said mildly. Mr. Carraway, Port Security Liaison. Your badge is counterfeit, she said, equally mild. Port Security's lamination never lines up with the state seal. A flicker, admiration, crossed his face. Then let's dispense with ceremony. He nodded to Hargrave. The pry bar rose. Tamsin didn't step back. She stepped forward, 2 strides, fast, not at the bar, but at the breaker box on the wall. She yanked it open and slammed the main, and the corridor swallowed light. In the same motion, she swung the pry bar she carried at their knees, not heads. Men who can't stand can't force doors. The dark was hers. The ship gave it to her. She felt the handrail by memory, the deck's pitch by habit. She pivoted, ducked, felt a sleeve whisper past her cheek where a fist was 2 seconds late, and brought the bar down again on the place where physics both begins and ends, the instep. Hargrave howled, a small and satisfying past tense. Enough, Carroway said quietly, and Tamsin felt rather than saw the thing in his hand. Not a baton. Not a gun. A knife, the kind that made rooms smaller. Don't, she said. You don't bring knives to ships. They remember. This ship, he said, remembers money. Light lanced, someone had a flashlight. It caught her in the eyes, it bleached the world. In that instant of battery sun, she saw what Carroway had brought with him that was worse than knives, competence that didn't care which way moral north pointed. She let the light dazzle her and fell in the direction the beam wanted. It pulled a cheer from Hargrave's mouth. It pulled Carroway a step forward. She rolled into the sealed corridor and slapped the device she'd clipped there hours ago where the bulkhead met the jamb, a small, ugly rectangle with a brass hose tail. What is that? Pierce asked, finally letting fear into his grammar. Negative pressure, she said. This room holds delicate things. This keeps air from slapping them in the face. The device whined, small but determined. A ribbon she'd taped to the lintel fluttered inward, air moving into the room, not out. She had bought herself seconds. She had maybe bought herself evidence that she had not been reckless. Carroway stepped anyway. Open it, he said. No, she said, and then, because there are moments when even a mechanic prays to something that is not physics, she put her hands on the wheel. It was cold. It was the cold of winter kept for years. It was the cold of responsibility. She turned. The vault breathed. And then, from somewhere deep in the Elysian crown, so deep it felt like history, another sound answered, the groan of metal taught to hate strain, the kind of low, patient warning that precedes failures with names like flood and settlement. Tamsin's stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with angles. Back, she said, to no one and everyone. All of you, back. Carroway smiled with half his mouth. Afraid? Of leverage, she said, and was already moving. The ship lurched, just a hair, just a whisper, just enough to turn the floor under their feet into a question. A locker door somewhere banged open like a gunshot. The motion sensor buzzed frantic Morse against her hip as if it, too, wanted to speak. She reached for the wheel to ease it closed and felt, in that small span, the shudder of bolts that no longer held their alignments like commandments. If she shut it now, she might not open it again without a welder in a week. If she left it open, the room's air would equalize, and the past would take a bite of the present for which no one had signed. Choose, Carroway said softly. She chose. She pushed the wheel farther. The vault door opened with a half-moan, half-sob, like a cathedral apologizing for its weight. Cold air brushed her face, no smell, only the absence of it, and the dark inside the room gathered itself like a hand. She stepped 1 foot over the threshold, felt the pressure shift against her skin like weather changing in a single note, and saw, in the headlamp beam of Pierce's fallen torch, what the first shelf on the left held, a wooden case with a torn corner that exposed, not canvas, not paper, but the dull, unmistakable sheen of stacked cylinders stamped in tiny letters that her eyes translated before they believed. Royal Mint. Platinum. 1942. Hargrave made a soft, vulgar syllable that sounded like a prayer. Carroway drew in a breath that had money in it. Tamsin lifted her hand. Don't move, she said. Don't breathe hard. Pierce laughed in a strangled way. You can't. But then the ship spoke again, louder this time, franker, one long, bad creak that came from below the sealed compartment and ended with the muted punch of something giving way underwater. The deck tilted a fraction. The pry bar slid against steel and chimed. Somewhere forward, a pump woke and died, woke and died, like an animal trying to stand. Carroway's face went from pale to paper. What did you? I didn't, Tamsin said. The tide did. The weight did. The years did. She took a step back and felt the vacuum tug her sleeve. A thin whistle began in the corner of the room, like a bottle learning to sing. What is that? Pierce whispered. Air, Tamsin said. Going somewhere in a hurry. Carroway lunged for the wheel. Don't, she said. If you slam it, the pressure spike will. He slammed it. The vault door bit steel with a sound like a bell. The whistle stopped. For a heartbeat, nothing else happened. Then the ship answered in a way that made the night throw its hands over its ears. A deep, wet concussion rolled up through the decks. The corridor lights strobed, died, stuttered, and found their courage again. The deck under their feet jumped like a horse fretting at a bit. Water, cold, black, impatient, began to whisper under the sealed room's threshold. Tamsin's breath vanished and came back as an order. Run, she said to men who didn't take orders from anyone, and they did, because the ship had started telling a story that cancels all the others. She stayed one heartbeat longer, palm flat on steel, like a vow. Behind the door, something knocked. Not a person. A century. She turned to go, and saw, at the end of the corridor where fog framed the hatch like a picture, a silhouette she recognized not from this life but the one that might come next, Asha, hair blown loose, eyes enormous, breath a bright ribbon in the cold. Tell me you didn't open it, Asha said, already knowing the answer. Tamsin opened her mouth to say the words she had, at last, earned. The ship tilted again, enough to set boxes marching, enough to teach a prayer how to sprint, and, from somewhere below, a klaxon that had not called in decades woke and began to keen. The deck at Tamsin's feet jerked, and the world went blue and loud, and the door behind her trembled as if deciding whether to stay part of a ship or become the face of a flood. She grabbed Asha's arm. Move, she said. And the Elysian crown exhaled like a cathedral taking a breath before it sang. Sang. The sound shivered the air as if brass ribs had flexed, as if 100 hands once again touched railings and turned their faces toward a distant harbor. Asha's nails bit Tamsin's forearm, the deck bit the soles of their boots, the ship decided to keep them whether they wanted keeping or not. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Water spoke from below as if it had opinions. Not the frantic chatter of a burst pipe, but the measured syllables of a pump that had slept too long waking to find its bed on fire. The klaxon's moan bounced along the companionway, ricocheted off brass and bulkhead, and burrowed into bone. Ballast, Tamsin said. She's taking on water through a seam near the vault bay, or the vault's weight is pinching the frames and squeezing something we can't see. Either way, we move. Now. And them? Asha thumbed at the corridor where Pierce, Hargrave, and the counterfeit badge had disappeared, their footfalls already fading into fog and law. If they've got instincts, they're running, Tamsin said, and pulled Asha with her. We're going to lower aft port, open the cross connects, and make the ship choose to float instead of fold. You can do that? Asha asked, not incredulous, cataloging. I've made elevators climb with less, Tamsin said. Elevators that hated me. They ran, the way you run on steel, hands grazing bulkheads to read vibration, boots finding treads without looking. The Elysian crown seemed to lean to listen. A hatch yawned, a ladder demanded knees, the air grew colder and wetter until they could taste iron like a coin under the tongue. The ballast control station had once been a neat little nook where men in blue coveralls leaned over diagrams and pretended gravity required their signatures. Now it was a nest of dials and dog-eared placards and one battered manual pump that had been left ready for a day when nothing else would speak. Tamsin loved it on sight. She threw open the manual board, mechanical linkages, relief valves, the maritime equivalent of nerve endings. Many were seized, some answered with a shy squeak like a hinge remembering song, one lever moved with the generous willingness of a dog flopping for a belly rub. She spun wheels, listened for pressure wake in the pipes, and found the cross-connect that would let port tanks court starboard's air. On my mark, she said. When I say now, spin that handwheel counterclockwise and keep spinning until I tell you to stop. If it fights, swear at it. It respects profanity. Asha planted her boots. You're sure? No, Tamsin said. But I'm right. She waited for the ship to breathe, there, the smallest lift under her feet, then slammed her lever. Now. Asha spun. The wheel resisted, then relented by halves, then decided it had always liked turning. The pipes woke in segments, a metallic gossip traveling along their walls. Somewhere deep, an airlock burped. The deck rolled one blister shy of comfort, and then settled into a new, less dangerous story. The klaxon ratcheted down a pitch. It still moaned, but thoughtfully, as if it had been reminded not to exaggerate. Tamsin placed both palms on the painted schematic of the Elysian Crown's underbelly, rectangles for tanks, arrows for intention. She imagined steel plates flexing, rivets sharing loads the way neighbors share soup. The ship's weight distributed itself like a well-kept secret. Her shoulders loosened, breath remembered what it was for. Okay, she said, and only then noticed her hands had been shaking hard enough to write their own weather. Okay, good. She'll ride this. If the breach is small. If the tide likes us. If the pump we heard can be coaxed past nostalgia. Asha nodded, every inch the lawyer who learned to triage truth from panic. Speak to me like a judge who's not a monster. Tide turns in 30. Tamsin checked her watch and felt silly for trusting a second hand to argue with the moon. We need to find the slurping we heard and either feed it or starve it. Feed it with air, starve it with a patch. Both are ugly. In the vault? Tamsin swallowed. She could still feel the wheels cold under her palm. Stays shut. Caraway's slam reset the pressure. If we touch it now, we change forces we can't see. Right now the ship holds its breath with it. Footsteps clanged up the ladder, a rhythm she had already learned, Olga's heavy patience, Marlowe's irritated limp. Olga arrived first, her breath a fog you could hang coats on. Marlowe's cap was backward in the universal signal for I came fast. You have water where water should not be, Olga said, not as a question. Port aft, under the sealed bay, Tamsin said. We cross-connected to ease the list. We need eyes on frames 20 to 24. Marlowe nodded. I can get you there quick if quick means stupid. It always does, Tamsin said. Asha, you and Olga talk to the dock. If Caraway brings paper, you stall with more paper. Ask for proofs of chain, clean badges, independent oversight, anything that loves time. Tell them we have a TRO and a ship that prefers not to drown to satisfy their curiosity. Asha's mouth tugged into one of those rare smiles that showed teeth. The last bit won't be in the motion, but I'll imply it. She touched Tamsin's sleeve once, quick. Don't be noble. Be efficient. Always, Tamsin said, and followed Marlowe into the narrow part of the world where bulkheads leaned in and asked you to be smaller. They bled speed in the cargo trunk, ducked a windlass that had opinions about skulls, skated over patches where the deck plating slicked itself with old oil. The air smelled of wet rope, paint, and the patient breath of tides. Marlowe's flashlight caught low, respectful arcs. He paused at a dogged hatch with its paint worn off around the wheel. I don't like this one, he said. It remembers being opened badly. Then we open it kindly, Tamsin said. She put her palm flat to the metal, counted to 5 so her skin told her what the gauge wouldn't, then eased the wheel. The dog sprang when it was ready, not when asked. She talked to it under her breath the way people talk to horses in stubborn valves. Below, the bilge had become a rumor of a pond. Not a flood, not yet, a hush that translated footfalls into ripples. The ship's frames rose on either side like ribs, paint scabbed where time had gnawed. She crouched, lamp sweeping low. There, a hairline weep where a rivet line had stretched under load, not failed, but decided to see what failing felt like. Lovely, she whispered. And almost. Marlowe squinted. Weeping seam. Port side. Frames 22 to 23. Could have been nothing for another year if you hadn't woken the old girl. Or it was waiting for a reason to become ours, Tamsin said. We give it a different reason. She rifled her bag, neoprene sheet, emergency epoxy, a box of bolts, 2 clamps whose threaded rods had saved marriages. It wasn't the repair she wanted, it was the repair the day allowed. She cut the neoprene to bridge the weeping, pressed it to the hull, set the clamp jaws wide as a hug and tightened until the material made a sound like a satisfied seal. The weep thinned, turned sulky, then almost stopped. Almost, Marlowe said, as if the word could convince physics. She cross-braced with a second clamp, epoxied the edges, set a temporary backer plate she'd cut from spare. The klaxon upstairs found a lower, more bored voice. The pump that had coughed now cleared its throat and swallowed brown water with a steadier greed. It'll hold, she said. Until tide. Until morning. Until we can put steel where prayers are. He grunted, which in Marlowe meant, I'm going to believe you now so I can argue later. They sloshed back up, the ship seemed to approve, settling into the small comforts of an old body treated gently. At the companionway to the vault corridor, Tamsin slowed. The motion sensor's key fob in her pocket was quiet. The ribbon by the lintel hung still, the negative pressure pump hummed like a patient cat. She pressed her ear to the steel. The cold under her skin had a shape, a roomful of winter waiting for spring. No whistle. No violence. Only a century, breathing. She turned and found Asha waiting with a clipboard and a face like fresh ice. Olga stood behind her, a kindness statue with a thermos in one hand and a small, polite bat in the other. They came back, Asha said. Caraway and his enthusiasm. He had 3 officers and a piece of paper he called a demand. He did not, however, have service, proper notice, or a signature acquainted with reality. The port director did send a liaison, Ms. Valdez. Sensible, skeptical, wants to see the auction docs. I offered to email them after I redacted your phone number and the doodles in the margins. Thank you for redacting my hearts and lightning bolts, Tamsin said, because humor patchwelds fear. Olga poured from the thermos and handed them each something that steamed like resolve. Tea. With honesty. Is that a flavor? Asha asked. It becomes one, Olga said. Tamsin told them what she and Marlowe had done below, the clamps, the neoprene, the promise. Asha nodded like a ledger closing a balance. And the radio, she asked. It printed again. Tamsin's chest tightened. When? 10 minutes ago. Asha held out a new curl of paper. The ink was still a little wet, letters crisp as a snapped rule. Elysian Crown / courier delayed / hold for instruction / do not transfer. Do not transfer, Tamsin read, and laughed because the universe preferred audacity. I wasn't planning to transfer a ship. Olga sipped tea. Maybe they mean debt. Or responsibility. Or contents, Asha said. Either way, the message stream proves a point useful to us. The ship's systems were, at some point, configured to receive secure traffic. That bolsters the argument that the vault room and its protocols are part of the vessel's appurtenances as sold. Speak slower, Tamsin said. My head is full of pumps. It helps your legal claim, Asha translated. Oh, Tamsin said, and let that small, selfish relief shore up her spine. A knock echoed from the main hatch, 3 sharp raps that were not the rhythm of reporters, nor of men who broke laws casually. Olga rolled her shoulders and flowed like a glacier toward the sound. Ms. Valdez stepped in, followed by a man with a tool bag and a gaze that respected everything it landed on. Valdez wore a high-vis jacket that couldn't quite hide its competence. The man wore grease under his nails like a credential. Ms. Farouk, Valdez said. I'm Lydia Valdez, acting port director. This is Chief Engineer Wallace from the Harbor Authority. We've reviewed your restraining order and your auction documents. We're here to make sure nobody drowns for a story, including you. You have my gratitude, Tamsin said. And my clamps. She told them what they needed to know, not the vault's content, not yet, but weight and pressures and how a ship dreams, and Wallace nodded, expression sharpening the way men like him sharpen knives. You've balanced her, he said. Smart with the cross connects. You'll want to ease starboard aft tank 2 in an hour when the tide starts back, otherwise she'll slap against the quay like a drum. I can put 2 men on the pumps. I'll be one, Tansen said. Valdez glanced past them at the sealed corridor. She didn't ask. Instead, she said, you will also have 2 officers at the gangway who work for me. If Mr. Counterfeit tries to stroll aboard with his paper again, we'll discuss contempt of court within reach of cameras. Will the cameras leave? Asha asked dryly. Not for long, Valdez said. But they'll film me saying no comment, which is a public service. Tansen's phone buzzed with a text from a number that achieved offense by existing, Pierce. She showed Asha. Pierce, *, we need to talk. You do not understand what you're inside. Meet me at the forward mooring in 15. Come alone, *. Asha's eyebrows went up into her afternoon. He is very predictable, she said. Which is almost a kindness. I'll go, Tansen said. You will not go alone, Olga said. I will be the air near you. And I will be the law 2 decks up, Asha said. If he tries come alone, we'll try absolutely not. Tansen met Pierce at the forward mooring because sometimes the only way through a knot is to look at it from where it tangles. He stood with his hands deep in his coat pockets, face pale as unprimed hull, his smile gone someplace that didn't carry receipts. You brought friends, he said, seeing Olga ghost into the shadow of a bollard without actually becoming less visible. I brought witnesses, Tansen said. They're better for stories. He laughed once. You think this is a story? I know it is, she said. The question is what genre. You can help with that. He looked toward the river where Fogg had laid down to rest and decided to speak. Hargrave works muscle for whoever pays. Caraway answers to men whose names you join together with ampersands and end with partners. I answer to a country that would rather not say its name out loud in front of microphones. The vault holds items that should have moved in 1979 and didn't. Some are art, some are evidence, some are less describable. If you make the wrong kind of noise, you will attract a collection of agencies that do not coordinate except when they eat. So whisper, Tansen said. What do you need? Time, he said. 72 hours. We'll bring proper documentation and a plan not to drown your ship. In exchange, you do not let anyone else in there. Not embassies hungry for headlines. Not investors hell-bent on stripping value from what ought to be returned. Not thieves with badges. Return to whom? She asked. He flinched. That is the argument that will never end. Then start it right, she said. With catalogs and light. With building a chain that can be held without gloves. He looked at her as if she'd turned into a stair where he'd expected a wall. Who are you? A mechanic, she said. A person who likes parts to be where they belong. A person who knows what happens when you skip a step. You can have time. But I have conditions. Name them. Your 72 hours start when Valdez signs the log. During that window, nobody opens the vault without me, Asha, Valdez, Wallace, and a third party we pick who can tell a forged provenance from a bedtime story. We will film every inch. We will touch nothing we don't have to. We will create a list of whose hearts need to race and why. If your in-partner's friends try to freeload on our courtesy, I will take a camera crew by the hand and show them where you stand. He considered, jaw muscles making plans. Agreed. I'm not finished, she said. While we wait, you tell me what the radio messages mean. He blinked. What radio messages? She watched his face not for honesty but for surprise. Surprise arrived. Your secure channel is still alive, she said softly. It's printing. Hold for instruction. Await courier. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. When he opened them, something like respect took a chair. Our system was mothballed in the 80s, he said. But the redundancies, ships like yours, were kept on a maintenance loop. A very dusty loop. Someone upstream has more nostalgia than budget. It means the protocol expects a diplomatic handover that never happened. It means, to the right people, you're not a salvage owner. You're a station. A station, Tamsin repeated, and felt the word become a gear that might move something else. A gull called the way gulls do when they think humans are overcomplicating fish. Olga cleared her throat like a church asking for quiet. Your 72 hours, Tamsin said. They start when Valdez signs. Go get your paperwork. And your conscience. He almost smiled. We'll see which weighs more. He left, footsteps finding the rhythm of men who had been wrong and now wanted to be less so. By dusk, the ship had decided to live for another tide. Wallace's men babysat the pumps as if reading bedtime stories. Valdez wrote her name where names keep things honest. Asha built a barricade of words around the gangway and inhabited it with grace. The cameras stayed, because cameras are barnacles. Olga stared them into blinking. In the blue hour, when everything admits what color it truly is, Mona and Ken reappeared with a thermos and a bag of sandwiches drawn on with stars. Mona wore a hat with ears. We heard your ship crying on the TV, Mona announced. Is she okay? She's better, Tamsin said. She remembered she knows how. Mona nodded, solemn. Sometimes I forget how to do long division and then remember because of toast. That's exactly the same, Tamsin said gravely, and took a sandwich she had not known she needed. Night came on. The radio printed once more, Courier ETA 0400. Hold. The printer's motor sounded a little smug, as if pleased to have a purpose after years of being a paperweight. What do we do until then? Asha asked at midnight, voice soft as deck shoes. We prepare a room for the past to enter without panic, Tamsin said. And we make a path for after. After? Tamsin turned the word in her mouth like a bolt she wanted to fit clean. We'll need a framework, a trust that can hold what we can't claim, a museum partner that returns what it must, a medical chain to route anything biological to the labs it belongs to without letting thieves with stethoscopes steal headlines. We'll need valuation, but not the kind that makes auctioneers salivate. We'll need to build a story the public can live with. Say the number, Asha said, as if numbers behaved better once named. 120 million in platinum at least, Tamsin said. If the assay marks are honest. The art, she shook her head. I won't guess. Not with the world listening. Asha watched her for a long breath. You want to give most of it away. I want it to end up where it belongs, Tamsin said. Some will come through me. I bought the ship. I took the risk. I'll take enough to build a yard where old things are taught to breathe again, and to make my mother's mortgage, and to pay everyone who said yes when no would have been easier. The rest? It was never mine. Its time makes us think it is. Asha's smile returned, sharp and soft. Write that down. Judges like sentences that taste like sense. At 3:50, the fog thinned the way curtains do when someone behind them breathes in. A small launch nosed the quay, no flags, no markings, just the purposeful anonymity of work that wishes to be quiet. Two figures stepped out. One was Pierce. The other was a woman wearing a navy cardigan and the sort of smile that gets things through customs in 20 minutes because it has before and will again. She carried a steel case as if it contained nothing more exciting than pens. Valdez and Wallace met them at the gangway. Papers were shown, scanned, sniffed by Asha for legal mold. The woman introduced herself as Commander Lee Hart, retired but stubborn. I am here as a courier, she said. Not as anyone's agent. My job is to present a procedure that once made sense to people who are dead and see if it still can. Welcome aboard, Tamsin said, and meant the welcome as a warning to anyone who thought the Elysian Crown was a stage for their script. They assembled by the sealed corridor, Tamsin, Asha, Valdez, Wallace, Olga, Pierce, Commander Hart with her steel case, Marlowe because he had earned the right to watch history behave, Mona and Ken on the quay where Mona could narrate to the seagulls. Hart opened the case. Inside lay a reader, old but maintained, meant for keys that weren't keys, punched strips, a pattern language from when computers were furniture. She held up a ribbon. If the lock retrofit did what it was supposed to, she said, This will tell the vault we brought the right kind of knock. Will it open it without pressure fireworks? Tamsin asked. Hart's smile acknowledged dread like a colleague. If the ship agrees. They posted Wallace by the ballast board with a man on each handwheel. Valdez held the radio like a weapon. Asha set her phone to record. Olga stood where she could stop any man from discovering whether he could fly. Hart fed the strip into the reader. The device made an amiable chewing noise, lights winked in a pattern that had made sense to some engineer in 1961 and no one else since, and the solenoid in the vault frame clicked a polite greeting. Tamsin laid her palm to the wheel. Hello again, she whispered. Be kind. She turned. The ribbon at the lintel fluttered inward, negative pressure strong, as it should be. Wallace called a number, his men eased a valve, the ship's breath steadied. The door unseated with the sound of him learning a new verse. Cold air slid around their ankles, smelling of dust that never met lungs and metal that had told itself not to rust with the zeal of monks. The first sight inside was not treasure but tape, caution lines marking aisles of prudence had wanted observed. Hart's face softened, a small, private grief for procedures honored by strangers. Go slow, Tamsin said, to everyone in the room. Eyes only unless safety demands hands. They went slow. Asha read labels with a hunger for names. Valdez logged crate numbers in a tidy block script that would live to argue for decades. Wallace stood perfectly still and listened to the ship the way a doctor listens to a chest. Olga watched the door in the world. Pierce watched Tamsin. On the third shelf, Hart stopped. Here, she said softly. Medical. She lifted a lid enough to see foam that once had been dry ice. The vapor of old cold reached up and touched her eyelashes. Vials lay nested, glass, sealed, labels in Latin and bureaucrat. Asha's eyes sharpened. Chain of custody, she murmured, already drafting a petition to have university labs receive what they were owed. The art crates received the opposite of ceremony, reverence that looked like neglect. Tamsin didn't open any, she put her hand on their lids. Not to claim, only to say I see you. Hart knelt by the platinum tray and counted without saying numbers. Pierce watched her and looked, for the first time, less like a suit and more like a person remembering a museum from childhood. Documentation, Asha said. Hart handed her another ribbon. Valdez took photos of instruments. Wallace called down to his men to ease the aft starboard tank 1 degree, which apparently was a thing you could ask water to do if you used the right voice. They had been in the room long enough for the cold to make choices in their fingers when the radio outside burped. Valdez frowned. Unscheduled traffic. She stepped away to answer. Port control, go. She turned slowly back, face gone that special shade of careful we keep for moments when what we feared decides to be punctual. Caraway, she said. With a writ from a judge who wanted his signature on television. Asha's mouth thinned. He forum shopped overnight. Can he board? Tamsin asked. Valdez breathed once through her nose. Not without stepping through me. Olga's hand found the polite bat. We won't win if we make this a duel, Asha said swiftly. We win if we make it boring and righteous. We need a gesture so clean it sterilizes microphones. Then we take one box, Hart said. One indisputable public good. The medical. Valdez nodded. I can escort a sealed crate to the harbor lab now. Press will film a chain of custody that glows in the dark. If Caraway tries to stop that, he's on the wrong side of 10,000 sick children and 1,000 voters. Asha? Tamsin asked. Do it, Asha said. And call the university hospital. They'll wake a dean for this. Hart selected a crate the size of a bread box with a label that said more by being brief, vaccine adjuvants, trial, archive. Her hands were steady, professional. We do not open this, she said. We log it, we seal it in sight of witnesses, we walk it with cameras, and we put it into a lab freezer before anyone says the word jurisdiction twice. Valdez called up to the quay for 2 officers. Asha opened the case with seals and numbered zip ties. Wallace signed, then Hart, then Tamsin, then Asha, then Valdez. The crate left the room hugging its integrity like a saint's bone. They reached the main deck with news crews already panting, their lenses like many eyes. Valdez lifted the crate like an altarpiece and spoke very clearly into a dozen microphones. Emergency medical materials discovered aboard the Elysian Crown are being transferred under seal to the University Hospital freezer in accordance with Public Safety and Court Order 241132. This is not a spectacle. It is a responsibility. Carraway arrived at a trot with 2 actual officers and 1 camera he'd rented with his conscience. He lifted a piece of paper that might have been legal and tried to find a voice that didn't tremble on the word seize. Asha stepped into his shot with a judge's name and a case number that outranked his like an older sibling. You will not interfere with the removal of medical materials to a safety facility under port emergency protocol, she said, and pointed the microphones at that. Carraway's face did mathematics and came up with later. He lowered his paper. We'll be back, he said, to the cameras, which is a prayer that knows its own sinful heart. The escort left, sirens off, dignity on. The cameras got bored because public safety doesn't retweet as well as scandal. Carraway tried to look like he'd come for that outcome all along and failed. Pierce looked at his shoes, which is how you apologize when you can't yet. They returned to the vault. The room felt different now, as if having given one thing away, it wanted to negotiate. Hart took out another ribbon, placed it back in the case. We will not open more today, she said. Not until we've built the frame for the rest. Pierce cleared his throat. I have a proposal from my quiet employers. A trust for restitution. You chair it with Ms. Kamdar and Director Valdez. The trust holds the ship's contents in escrow for identification and return. You receive a salvage premium negotiated against the risks you took. The public receives transparency. The courts receive work. Asha's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in focus. Put it in writing. With real signatories. No acronyms. And a fund for the ship, Tamsin said. She earns her own repairs. Hart smiled at the door as if it were a person who had finally said something sane. Done, she said. But be ready, once this is public, others will appear, families, museums, governments, and they will not all be graceful. Then we build grace into the floor, Tamsin said. So even the graceless stand on it without knowing. They began the slow work that looks like nothing and changes everything. Wallace supervised welding teams who arrived with thermoses and respect. Marlowe taught a young deckhand how to listen to a hole without translating it into fear. Olga walked the perimeter with a poet's pacing, and the oddest thing happened. Seagulls sat in a row on the funnel and heard her recite Szymborska as if she were reading maps. The radio printed less frequently and with fewer capital letters, as if reassured. The pumps found a rhythm that could be slept to. The press alternated between impatience and myth-making. Asha rationed them both with equal fairness. On the second night, when fog made an hourglass of the harbor lights, Tamsin found Mona asleep on a coil of rope with a book about ships and ears. Ken dozed on a bollard with a sandwich wrapper for a blanket. Tamsin covered them with a jacket and stood a long time at the rail, feeling the line between river and hull as if it were a pulse under a wrist. You could have taken it all, Pierce said from 3 steps back. Sold it in little pieces. Moved away. I could have, Tamsin said. And lived like a question mark. This way I get to be a comma. Maybe a semicolon on weekends. He snorted. Your metaphors pay tax. So will the trust, she said, and looked back at the superstructure where the Elysian Crown wore her rust like a shawl. If we do this right, a lot of people get to finish sentences they thought time had stolen. Families get paintings with candles lit under them again. Labs get to test compounds frozen before their parents met. The port gets a ship that breathes. And you, he asked. She touched the rail. I get to build a yard. Buy a crane that doesn't sigh before it lifts. Teach apprentices who like grease better than applause. Take my mother to dinner. Maybe sleep. Ambitious, he said. Mechanical, she corrected. On the morning the first check from donors who had once been thieves cleared into the trust account, Money that would pay welders and archives alike. The vault gave up one last, stubborn gift. Behind a stack of tins Hart had deemed safe to move lay a leather portfolio swollen with papers that smelled like secrets. Asha opened it the way you open a cat, cautiously, with respect for claws. Inside, correspondence, diplomatic, prickly, dirty with the fingerprints of treaties that had tried to be better. There were maps. There were lists. There was, folded small as a withheld breath, a note written on hotel stationery in tidy, urgent hand. If found, do the audit. Do not let them say later. The ship remembers. A. Asha read it twice, then held it up so all their names could see themselves reflected in paper. We're doing the audit, she said, and for a moment even the Gulls agreed to be quiet. The audit took days. It began with Tamsin's chalk on crate lids and ended with a database so clean it could substitute for conscience. They found canvases that made grown archivists sit down. They found counterfeit certificates so skillful Asha framed one as a cautionary tale. They found coins and medals and one small statue that made Wallace swear in 3 languages because it had watched a war and remembered too well. They found, in a corner, a box of letters tied with brown ribbon, not valuable to anyone but the person who had written them. The return address said Elysian Crown and the dates ran from 1954 to 1957. Mona read them aloud, halting and perfect, to the seagulls and anyone who had ever believed mail could save a life. By the time a proper court appointed the trust and blessed Valdez as guardian of the gate, the number took its place on paper without swagger, $120 million in platinum, give or take what the assay would kiss or slap, art with a future that would bruise and then heal, medicines that were mostly history but in some vials might speak to tomorrow. Carraway came one last time. He didn't bring cameras. He brought himself, less certain. He walked the vault's threshold and did not cross it. You did what we should have done in 1979, he said. You held and you listened. We had the advantage of not being sure we were right, Tamsin said. And you had a ship that remembered the procedure, he added, almost smiling. The radio printed again, you know. My office received the final message. What did it say? Hart asked. He looked at her and, for once, offered a fact without garnish. Completed. The city made out like a harbor in winter, quiet on top, busy where it matters. The quay filled with people who came to look and stayed to help. Welders taught high school students heaving on a dog for the first time. Archivists taught dockhands how to lift a frame without letting fingerprints make history lie. A blogger wrote a think piece that got everything wrong and nothing malicious. A grandmother brought soup and announced that she had danced on this ship in 1962 and would like to do so again if the deck did not mind. The day they moved the first canvas into the light for authentication, under controlled air and with enough paper to choke a very polite goat, the ship decided to be theatrical. Sun found a gap in the cloud and laid a hand on the deck. The paint, exhausted but dignified, reflected gold. Marlowe took off his cap. Olga recited 3 lines about forgiveness. Wallace pretended not to be moved. Asha grinned as if a verdict had finally learned to love itself. Tamsin stood with her hands in the back pockets of her overalls and felt the Elysian Crown breathe under her. The sensation was not an illusion. The trimmed tanks, the eased frames, the small, honest repairs, all had added up to a whole that believed in herself again. Start her? Wallace asked casually, as if the question were not the weight of 2 decades and 3 board meetings and a miracle. Not yet, Tamsin said, smiling. We'll let her dream about it. Then maybe one day we'll tow her upriver, let people walk her promenade and eat bad cake and read the names of those who came back to her after all this time. Name the yard yet? Asha asked. Tamsin considered. The foundry, she said. Where lost things get smelted into futures. Mona tugged her sleeve. Can I work there when I'm big? You can work there now, Tamsin said. We need supervisors with ears. At sunset, when headlines had settled into honesty and donors into checks that did not bounce, the radio printed one final curl of paper. The motor whirred like a sigh. Tamsin, Asha, and Hart read it together. Elysian Crown / thank you. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Olga, who had thought she had no use for machines' manners, wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and told the gulls they were very rude. That night, the vault was closed not with fear but with ceremony. They spun the wheel with hands that had learned to take weight and give it back. The seals clicked into place like punctuation. Valdez entered in the log, room secured/purpose, stewardship. Tamsin stood alone in the engine room, her palm warm against the diesel's cowl, listening to a kind of quiet that wasn't absence but choice. She pictured her mother at the kitchen table counting envelopes, she pictured a yard with cranes that didn't sigh, she pictured a crowd on a summer day walking a promenade deck and discovering that ships are not ghosts when you say their names right. She shut down the auxiliary power one string at a time. The lights dimmed into their own memories. The printer upstairs, satisfied, slept. On the quay, Mona Dream narrated to a line of seagulls as Ken pretended not to cry and failed. Asha found her there. "You know what comes next," she said. "Work," Tamsin said. "And naps." In a press conference, Asha said, Wince smiling. "I can do 2 out of 3. They walked up together through air that smelled of river and something else that might have been gratitude. The city's lights made constellations of cranes, the ship answered with a line of bulbs along her rail, restored and stubborn. On the upper deck, by a railing polished by ghosts, the people who had said yes when no would have been easier stood in a crooked circle: Valdez, Wallace, Marlowe, Olga, Hart, Pierce, Ken with his hat in his hands, Mona with a gull feather for a wand. Tamsin took her place not in the center but as a spoke. "Thank you," she said, "for watching with me while a ship remembered what she was." She took a breath. The trust is formed. The labs have their boxes. The archives have their lists. The lawyers have their commas. The welders have their metal. The Elysian crown has her breath. We'll keep her. We'll share her. We'll let her tell the stories she kept for us because no one listened in time. Now we have time. A gull laughed as if to say it had all been obvious. The river turned in its sleep, the tide running out with a polite tug. The ship rose a whisper and steadied, content. Down in the sealed corridor, the vault door held its peace. Behind it, a sentry exhaled and arranged itself in boxes for tomorrow, like a chorus waiting for the conductor to lift a hand. And on the quay, where witnesses had become hands, a small girl with a hat that had ears pointed at the headlines and a glowing phone and read the words with the rounded care usually reserved for spells. "Mechanic girl buys abandoned ocean liner," Mona chanted, "finds treasure worth $120 million. She looked up at Tamsin. "That's you." Tamsin grinned the way ships do in their sleep. "That's us." The city breathed them all into its story. Somewhere, a distant buoy chimed. Somewhere, a judge wrote an opinion that would make casebooks sigh with relief. Somewhere, in a house whose pictures had always had gaps where canvases should have been, a family lit a candle because a phone call said coming home. On the Elysian crown, under a sky that had not made up its mind about stars, Tamsin Farouk put her hand on steel and felt it answer. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.